They thought she was just a trophy wife, a pretty ornament to be dusted off for galas and then locked away. Richard, her husband, didn't just cheat on her. He systematically tried to erase her existence, replacing her with a younger, hungrier version of herself in their social circle, their home, and even their bed. He thought he held all the cards. He thought her family was just polite old money, too dignified to fight back. He was wrong. Dead wrong. When Richard tried to finalize the divorce to leave her with nothing, he swiped his black Amex and saw the word that would ruin his life. Declined. This is the story of how a billionaire found out that his wife's quiet brothers owned the bank he was trying to steal from. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the kind of event where the air conditioning smelled like expensive lilies and old money. Riley stood near the Temple of Dendur, swirling a glass of sparkling water she had no intention of drinking. She was wearing a vintage Dior gown, a midnight blue silk that whispered against the floor, a relic from her grandmother's collection. She hated these events. She hated the forced smiles, the cheek kisses that never made contact, and the way people looked over her shoulder to see if someone more important had walked in. But Richard loved them. Richard Sterling, her husband of 10 years, the man who had taken her family's quiet generational wealth and leveraged it into a flashy hedge fund empire, Sterling and Company. He was across the room, holding court. He was handsome in that aggressive, polished way, teeth whitened to a blinding shade, a tuxedo that fit a little too perfectly. His hand resting casually on the lower back of his new executive assistant, Jessica. Jessica was 24. She was bright, bubbly, and wore a red dress that was just a shade too loud for a charitable event. It was a dress Richard had bought. Riley knew this because she had seen the charge on the joint account, labeled vaguely as client relations. "Your husband is certainly animated tonight," a voice drawled beside her. Riley turned to see Mrs. Beatrice Calloway, a woman whose opinion could sink a debutante in 3 seconds flat. Beatrice was looking at Richard, her eyes narrowed behind rhinestone-encrusted spectacles. "He's working the room, Beatrice," Riley said softly, her voice practiced and even. "You know how he is about the new fund." "And the girl?" Beatrice asked, not looking at Riley. "Is she part of the fund too?" Riley felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "She's his assistant. Jessica. She's very capable." "She's wearing your perfume, Riley," Beatrice said, finally, turning to look at her. The older woman's gaze wasn't malicious, it was pitying, and that was worse. "Santal 33. You've worn it since your wedding. It's distinct. And she is marinating in it." Riley froze. She hadn't noticed the scent over the lilies, but now that Beatrice said it, she couldn't unsee the other similarities. Jessica had cut her hair recently, a sharp bob just like Riley's. She was wearing diamond studs, small and tasteful, identical to the ones Richard had given Riley for their 5th anniversary. "It's a popular scent." Riley deflected, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "It's a replacement strategy," Beatrice whispered, leaning in close. "I saw it with the Vanderbilts in '98. I saw it with the Rothschild boy in London. He's not just cheating, darling. He's auditioning her for the role. Wake up." Beatrice patted Riley's arm and drifted away, leaving Riley standing alone in the shadow of an ancient Egyptian temple, feeling like a relic herself. Later that night, the limousine ride back to their penthouse on 57th Street was suffocating. Richard was buzzing with adrenaline, scrolling through emails on his phone. Jessica had been dropped off at her apartment in Tribeca, a luxury building Riley knew for a fact Richard's company leased for Visiting consultants. Did you see the look on Arthur's face when I mentioned the quarterly returns? Richard laughed, loosening his tie. Your brothers. They're good men, Riley, but they lack vision. They're too conservative. They sit on that trust fund, like dragons guarding gold, afraid to spend a penny. Riley looked out the window at the blur of city lights. My brothers are careful, Richard. That's why we still have the gold. Richard scoffed. Careful is another word for scared. I'm going to double our net worth this year. And Jessica, she's a shark. She found a loophole in the tax code regarding the Cayman accounts that saved us $3 million last week. She's invaluable. She was wearing my perfume, Riley said. She hadn't meant to say it. The words just slipped out, quiet and sharp. Richard didn't even look up from his phone. Don't be ridiculous. You don't own a cent, Riley. You're being paranoid. It's unbecoming. Beatrice Calloway noticed. That made him stop. Richard looked up, his eyes cold. The charm was gone, replaced by the shark-like stare that terrified his junior analysts. Beatrice is a dinosaur, and you— He reached out, patting her knee with a condescension that made her skin crawl. You are tired. You've been moody lately. Maybe you should go to the house in Connecticut for a few weeks. Rest. Clear your head. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. I'm not going to Connecticut, Riley said, pulling her leg away. We have the investors' dinner next week, Richard snapped. I need everyone on their A-game. If you're going to be sulking and obsessing over what my assistant wears, you're a liability. Jessica can handle the seating charts and the greeters. You just take a break. Riley looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the grey hairs he dyed black, the slight tremor in his hand, from too much espresso and Adderall the hunger that was never satisfied. He didn't see a wife. He saw an asset that was depreciating. You want me to miss the investors' dinner? Riley asked. The one my family founded. I'm running it now, Richard said, turning back to his phone. Go to Connecticut, Riley. Don't make me make it a medical necessity. You know Dr. Arrington owes me a favor. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Dr. Arrington was a psychiatrist who specialized in wealthy women who needed a rest. Richard was threatening to have her committed or at least medicated into compliance if she didn't step aside. Riley stayed silent the rest of the ride. But she wasn't sulking. She was thinking about her brothers, Arthur and Lucas. Richard thought they were slow. He thought they were boring men who liked fly fishing and reading dusty law books. He thought their silence was weakness. He had no idea that while he was playing checkers with borrowed money, Arthur and Lucas were playing 4D chess with the global banking system. 3 days later, Riley returned home from a yoga class to find her closet doors open. It was a walk-in closet the size of most Manhattan studio apartments, lined with cedar and custom lighting. She stopped in the doorway, her yoga mat slipping from her hand. Her clothes were gone. The racks that held her evening gowns, her silk blouses, her tailored blazers, all empty. In their place were garment bags, plastic-wrapped and new. "Richard!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She ran into the hallway, colliding with the housekeeper, Maria. Maria looked terrified. She was wringing her hands, her eyes darting toward the study. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling," Maria whispered. He told us to pack it all for donation. He said you were remodeling your look." Riley pushed past her and threw open the doors to the study. Richard was sitting at his mahogany desk, a desk that had belonged to Riley's grandfather, signing papers. Jessica was sitting on the edge of the desk, her legs crossed, reviewing a spreadsheet. They both looked up. Jessica didn't jump. She didn't look guilty. She smiled a tight, polite smile, as if Riley were a client who had arrived early for an appointment. "Where are my clothes?" Riley demanded, shaking. Richard sighed, putting down his pen. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Riley, please. No hysterics. I told you you need a refresh. You've been looking frumpy. It reflects poorly on the brand. The brand, Riley stepped forward. I am your wife, not a logo. You threw away my grandmother's vintage Dior. It was old Riley, Jessica chimed in. Her voice was syrupy sweet, coated in false concern. Richard and I hired a stylist. We ordered a whole new wardrobe for you. More modern, brighter colors. We want you to look vibrant. Riley looked at the garment rack behind Jessica. She walked over and ripped the plastic off one of the new dresses. It was red, tight, short. It was exactly what Jessica would wear. You're turning me into you, Riley whispered, dropping the dress on the floor. I'm helping you stay relevant, Jessica said, her voice hardening. Richard needs a partner who looks the part of a billionaire's wife, not a librarian. Get out, Riley said to Jessica. Jessica didn't move. She looked at Richard. Jessica stays, Richard said calmly. She's helping me with the merger. You, however, are leaving. He opened a drawer and slid a manila envelope across the desk. What is this? Tickets to Switzerland, Richard said. Dr. Arrington has arranged a stay for you at a clinic in Zurich. Very exclusive, very discreet. They specialize in nervous exhaustion and paranoid delusions. I'm not paranoid. You just screamed about your clothes and accused my assistant of identity theft, Richard said. You're unwell, Riley. The car is downstairs. Your bags, the new ones, are packed. And if I refuse... Richard stood up. He walked around the desk and stood inches from her. He smelled of expensive cologne and ruthlessness. Then I file for divorce on the grounds of mental instability, he said softly. I have the documentation. I have the outbursts recorded like the one just now. I have Beatrice Calloway ready to testify that you were speaking nonsense at the gala. If we divorce this way, I get power of attorney over your assets until you are deemed fit, which with my doctors could be never. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won. Go to Zurich, Riley. Be a good girl. Let Jessica handle the public appearances for a while. We'll say you're doing charity work abroad. Everyone wins. Riley looked at him. She looked at Jessica, who was now checking her reflection in the window, indifferent to the destruction of a marriage. They had planned this perfectly. Isolate her. Gaslight her. Replace her. If she fought, she was crazy. If she left, she was abandoned. Riley reached out and took the envelope. Okay, she said. Her voice was hollow. Okay, Richard. You win. Richard's shoulders relaxed. He kissed her forehead. It felt like a brand. That's my girl. It's for the best. You'll see. When you come back, you'll thank me. Riley walked out of the study. She didn't go to the bedroom. She went to the elevator. The driver was waiting. She got into the car. JFK, ma'am, the driver asked. No, Riley said, pulling her phone out of her pocket. She had one contact pinned to the top. Not Richard. Arthur. She dialed. It rang once. Riley. Arthur's voice was deep calm and sounded like safety. He did it, Riley said, staring at the envelope in her hand. He tried to ship me to Zurich. He's replaced my wardrobe. He's putting Jessica in my place for the investors' dinner. There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy silence, then the sound of a heavy book being closed. Did he threaten your competency? Arthur asked. Yes, he mentioned Dr. Arrington. Okay, Arthur said. Where are you? In the car. He thinks I'm going to the airport. Go to the airport, Arthur said. Riley blinked. What do you want me to go? Go to the airport. Check in. Go through security. Go to the lounge. Make sure you use your credit card to buy a coffee so there is a timestamp. Let him see the notification. And then go to the bathroom, put on a wig, and walk out to the employee exit. Lucas is waiting for you in a grey sedan in the cargo lane. We're going to the Hamptons' house, the old one, the one Richard doesn't know about. Arthur. He's going to destroy me. He has lawyers. He has the board. Riley, Arthur said, and for the first time she heard a dark amusement in her brother's voice. Richard is a tenant in a house built on our land. He thinks he's the landlord because we let him hold the keys for a while. It's time to change the locks. He has my accounts monitored, she whispered. Let him monitor them, Arthur said. By tomorrow morning, Richard won't be worrying about your accounts. He's going to be worrying about why his credit card was declined for a stick of gum. What are you going to do? We're going to initiate Protocol Ice Age, Arthur said. Just get in the car with Lucas. And Riley. Yes. Don't cry. You're a Kensington. We don't cry. We litigate. Riley hung up. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. She looked at the driver. Take me to JFK. The grey sedan drove past the manicured hedges of East Hampton, ignoring the turnoffs for the flashy glass-walled mansions where new money went to party. Instead, Lucas turned onto a narrow gravel road that wound deep into a dense thicket of oaks. This was the old Hamptons, the part that didn't appear on real estate listings. They pulled up to the aviary, a sprawling, shingled estate that had been in the Kensington family since the 1920s. It didn't look like a fortress, but Riley knew better. The windows were bulletproof. The basement had a server room that rivaled the NSA's, and right now it was the only place Richard couldn't reach her. Lucas stopped the car. He was younger than Arthur, with sharp features and eyes that always seemed to be calculating odds. He turned to Riley, his expression softening. You look like you've been through a war zone, sis. I feel like I have, Riley said, stepping out into the salty air. He took everything, Lucas. My clothes, my dignity. He even tried to take my mind. He took nothing, Lucas said, grabbing her bag. He borrowed it. And the lease is up. Inside the library was thick with cigarette smoke, a habit Arthur only indulged in when he was plotting. Arthur was standing by the fireplace, reviewing a dossier that was 3 inches thick. When he saw Riley, he didn't hug her immediately. He walked over, took her face in his hands, and looked at her with a ferocity that startled her. Did he hit you? Arthur asked. His voice was low, dangerous. No, Riley said. He didn't have to. He just erased me. Arthur nodded, releasing her. Sit down. Drink this. He handed her a glass of amber liquid. It's grandfather's scotch. You're going to need it. Riley sat on the leather Chesterfield. So what is the plan? Richard has the best lawyers in the city. He has the board of Sterling and Company in his pocket. He says he's worth $3 billion. Arthur laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. He sat opposite her, crossing his legs. Riley, do you remember when you married Richard? You were 22. You were in love. You wanted to help him start his fund. I remember, she whispered. I asked you to co-sign the initial loan. We didn't just co-sign, Lucas said, leaning against the door frame, tapping on a tablet. We structured it. Richard is a brilliant salesman, but he's terrible with logistics. We set up Sterling and Company as a subsidiary of the Kensington Family Trust. It was a tax shield for us and a launch pad for him. I know that, Riley said. But he bought you out 5 years ago. He made a big show of it. He gave you that giant check at the Christmas party. He bought out the voting shares. Arthur corrected a cruel smile playing on his lips. He didn't buy the infrastructure. He didn't read the fine print, Riley. He was too busy looking at the cameras. Arthur opened the dossier and spun it around on the coffee table. Clause 14B. Arthur pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The moral turpitude and stability clause. It states that if the operating partner, that's Richard, engages in conduct that threatens the reputational integrity of the Kensington Trust or displays instability in his personal life that could affect the volatility of the assets, the primary guarantors. That's me and Lucas have the right to enact an immediate freeze of all liquidity to protect the principal investment. Riley stared at the paper. He tried to commit me to a mental institution, she realized. He was trying to prove I was the unstable one, so this clause wouldn't trigger against him. Exactly, Lucas said. He knew about the clause. He thought if he painted you as the crazy wife, he could divorce you without triggering the freeze. He thought he was playing 4D chess. But he made a mistake, Arthur said, lighting another cigarette. He acted too fast. He hasn't filed the medical papers yet. He hasn't finalized the commitment order. All he has is a wife who has disappeared and an assistant wearing that wife's clothes. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. He thinks you're on a plane to Zurich. He thinks he's free. Tonight he's going to take Jessica to dinner to celebrate. He's going to feel like a king. And tomorrow? Riley asked. Not tomorrow, Arthur said, turning back. Tonight. Lucas, what time is his reservation? 8 p.m. at Per Se, Lucas said, checking the tablet. Tasting menu. He pre-ordered the white truffles. Good, Arthur said. Let him eat the truffles. Let him get to the dessert course. And then... Arthur made a chopping motion with his hand. Execute Protocol Ice Age. What does that mean? Riley asked, her heart racing. It means... Lucas smiled, and it was a terrifying expression, that every bank account, every credit card, every asset tied to the Sterling name, and every offshore account he thinks we don't know about will be frozen. Not just declined, frozen. Flagged for federal review for suspicious activity. We are the bank, Riley, and we are closing the branch. Riley looked at her brothers. For years she had thought they were passive content to let Richard shine while they lived quiet lives. She realized now that they weren't passive. They were the ones holding the leash. Do it, Riley said, taking a sip of the scotch. It burned hot and cleansing. Freeze him out. New York City looked different when you felt like you owned it. For Richard Sterling, the city lights weren't just electricity. They were applause. He sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, holding Jessica's hand. She was glowing. The investors' dinner was 3 days away, but tonight was for them. Riley was gone. The problem was solved. He had received a text from the driver saying Riley had been dropped at JFK. He hadn't bothered to check if she actually boarded the plane. Why would he? She was Riley. She did what she was told. I can't believe we're finally doing this, Jessica cooed, leaning her head on his shoulder. I was looking at the penthouse layouts for the remodel. I think we should knock down the wall between the old study and the master bedroom. Make it a massive suite. Whatever you want, babe, Richard said, feeling magnanimous. Money is no object. The quarterly returns are up 12%. I'm untouchable. The car pulled up to the Time Warner Center. They took the elevator up to Per Se. The maitre d', a man named Henry, who had known Richard for years, bowed low. Mr. Sterling, always a pleasure. We have the private table overlooking the park. Excellent, Henri. And send over a bottle of the 82 Mistress. We're celebrating. Of course, sir. Dinner was a blur of indulgence. Richard talked about the future, the new yacht he was commissioning, the political donations he was planning to make to secure an ambassadorship, the way he was going to reshape the Manhattan skyline. Jessica nodded, fed his ego, and laughed at all the right moments. By the time the bill came, Richard was buzzing with wine and power. The check was placed on the table in a leather folder. It was astronomical, nearly $6,000. Richard didn't even look at it. He pulled out his Centurion card, the black titanium card that was the ultimate status symbol, and slid it into the folder without breaking eye contact with Jessica. "You know," he said, reaching across the table to stroke her cheek. "I was thinking after the dinner next week, we should go to St. Bart's. I'll buy you that villa you liked." "Oh, Richard," Jessica gasped. "You spoil me." The waiter returned. He looked uncomfortable. He leaned down, his voice a whisper. "Mr. Sterling, I'm terribly sorry. There seems to be an issue with the card." Richard frowned, his hand freezing on Jessica's face. He pulled his hand back. "What kind of issue?" "That card has no limit." "It was declined, sir. Code 05. Do not honor." Richard let out a short, annoyed laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. It's a chip error. Run it again." "We did, sir. 3 times. Perhaps you have another card." Richard felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. People at nearby tables were glancing over. He snatched the black card back and pulled out his platinum visa. "Use this one, and tell your system administrator to fix your machines. It's embarrassing for you." "Of course, sir." The waiter retreated. Richard took a sip of water, trying to regain his composure. "Technical glitches," he muttered to Jessica. "The banking infrastructure in this country is falling apart." 5 minutes passed. The waiter did not return. Instead, Henri, the manager, walked over. He looked grave. "Mr. Sterling." Henri said, his voice loud enough that the table next to them, a rival hedge fund manager named Tompkins, could definitely hear. "I'm afraid the visa was also declined, as was the corporate MasterCard on file." The silence that fell over the table was deafening. "That's impossible," Richard hissed, standing up. "I have $50 million in liquid cash in those accounts." "The system says frozen by issuer," Henri said, his politeness straining. "Mr. Sterling, we cannot process the payment. Perhaps your guest could assist." Richard turned to Jessica. Her eyes were wide. She looked from Richard to the bill, then to Henri. I don't have my wallet," Jessica stammered. "I left it at the office." Richard felt the walls closing in. Tompkins, the rival manager, was openly staring now, a smirk on his face. "I will call my banker," Richard announced, pulling out his phone. "This is a mistake. I'm going to have someone fired for this." He dialed the private line for Charles, his concierge banker at influential Manhattan Sovereign Bank. It rang and rang and rang. Usually Charles picked up on the first ring, day or night. Finally, a recording clicked on. "You have reached Manhattan Sovereign Bank. The extension you are dialing has been disconnected. If you are calling regarding the Sterling and Company, accounts please hold for the legal department." "Legal department?" Richard hung up. He was sweating now. He looked at Henri. I will write a check." "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. We cannot accept a personal check for this amount, given the authorization issues." Richard stared at him. "Do you know who I am? I bought this restaurant's wine cellar." "I know who you were, Mr. Sterling." Henry said, his voice cooling considerably. "But right now you are a customer who cannot pay. We will need to hold a form of collateral if you cannot settle the bill." "Collateral?" Richard choked out. "Your watch, perhaps?" Henri glanced at the Patek Philippe on Richard's wrist, a watch Riley had bought him for his 40th birthday. Value $85,000. "This is insane," Richard spat, but he saw the security guard stepping closer. He saw the smirk on Tompkins' face. He saw Jessica shrinking back, looking at him like he was a contagious disease. With trembling hands, Richard unclasped the watch and slammed it onto the table. "Keep it," he snarled. "I'll be back tomorrow with cash, and I'll buy this place just to fire you." "We look forward to it, sir," Henri said, picking up the watch with a napkin. "Please leave." Richard stormed out of the restaurant, Jessica trailing behind him, struggling to keep up in her heels. "Richard, what is going on?" she demanded as they hit the sidewalk. "That was humiliating." "Shut up, Jessica," Richard yelled, startling a passing tourist. "It's a glitch, a hack." "The Russians probably hacked the bank. I need to get to a computer." He pulled out his phone to call the driver. He tapped the app for the private car service. Account suspended. Payment method invalid. Richard stared at the screen. The Rolls-Royce was gone. The driver had left. "Where is the car?" Jessica whined. "It's freezing. We're taking a taxi," Richard said, raising his hand. A yellow cab pulled over. They piled in. 57th and Park, Richard barked. As the cab merged into traffic, Richard's phone buzzed. It was an email, not from the bank, not from his lawyer. It was from Arthur Kensington. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only 4 words. "Card declined, Richard." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He realized with a sickening jolt that Riley hadn't gone to Zurich. He dialed Riley's number. It went straight to voicemail. But the voicemail greeting had changed. It wasn't Riley's voice anymore. It was Lucas's voice. "You have reached the Kensington Asset Recovery Line. If you are Richard Sterling, please stop spending our money. We're watching." Richard threw the phone against the plexiglass divider of the taxi. "Driver!" he screamed. "Drive faster!" He had to get to the office. He had to get to the safe in his office. He kept emergency cash there. Gold bars, passports. If the banks were frozen, he needed the physical assets. But he didn't know that Lucas had already been to the office, and he didn't know that the locks on the 41st floor had been changed 20 minutes ago. The taxi screeched to a halt outside the Sterling Tower on 5th Avenue. Richard threw a crumpled $20 bill at the driver, the last cash he had in his pocket, and scrambled out. The towering glass structure was the crown jewel of his ego. He had insisted on leasing the top 5 floors, spending millions on renovations to make it look like a fortress of modern finance. He marched toward the revolving doors, Jessica clicking along behind him, her earlier bravado replaced by a shivering anxiety. "Richard, wait," she called out. "If the cards are frozen, how are we going to pay the staff tomorrow? It's payroll day." "I'll wire the money from the Cayman account," Richard snapped, not breaking stride. "I just need to get to my terminal." He reached the security turnstiles in the lobby. He slapped his pass card against the reader. Beep, beep. Red light. He tried again, harder. Beep, beep. Red light. "Damn it," Richard muttered. He looked up at the security desk. Sitting there was Frank, the night watchman, who had worked in the building for 20 years. Richard usually ignored him, offering a curt nod at best. "Frank," Richard shouted, waving his hand. "The system is down. Open the gate." Frank didn't move. He looked up from his monitor, his face impassive. He picked up a clipboard and scanned it slowly. "I can't do that, Mr. Sterling," Frank said, his voice echoing in the empty marble lobby. "What do you mean you can't?" Richard gripped the metal bars of the turnstile. "I own this company. Open the damn gate, or you're fired." Frank stood up. He was a big man, a former NYPD officer. He walked around the desk and stood on the other side of the gate, arms crossed. "You don't employ me, sir. The building management does. And at 9 p.m. tonight, the leaseholder for floors 35 through 40 invoked the emergency lockout protocol due to breach of contract." "Breach of contract?" Richard's voice rose to a shriek. "I signed a 10-year lease. Who is the leaseholder?" "Kensington Realty Trust," Frank said calmly. Richard staggered back as if he'd been punched. He looked at Jessica. She covered her mouth with her hand. "They own the building," Jessica whispered. "Richard, you told me you owned the building." I have a controlling interest," Richard stammered, lying. "They just hold the paper. It's a technicality." "It doesn't look like a technicality," Jessica said, her voice rising. "It looks like you're locked out." "Call the police," Richard demanded, pointing at Frank. "This is an illegal eviction." "I wouldn't do that, sir," Frank said. "The police are already upstairs. Mr. Arthur Kensington is walking them through the server room. Something about forensic accounting and embezzlement of trust funds." The blood drained from Richard's face. The police were in his office. They were looking at his hard drives. They would find the dual ledgers. They would find the unauthorized transfers to the consulting firm that paid for Jessica's apartment. Richard turned to Jessica, grabbing her shoulders. "Listen to me. We need to go. We need to go to your apartment. I have files on my laptop there. We can fix this." Jessica pulled away from him. She looked at his desperate eyes, his disheveled tuxedo, the sweat beading on his forehead. She looked at the security guard, who was watching them with pity. "My apartment?" Jessica asked coldly. "The one the company pays for?" "Yes, we just need to regroup." "Richard," Jessica said, taking a step back. "If they froze the company accounts, they froze the lease on the apartment. The doorman probably won't let me in. So come to a hotel with me." "With what money?" Jessica snapped. "Your cards are dead. You have $20. You're being investigated for embezzlement." "I love you," Richard said, playing his last card. "We're a team." Jessica laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "We were a team when you were a billionaire, Richard. Now you're a liability." She pulled her phone out and opened the Uber app. "I'm going to my parents' house in Jersey. Don't call me, and don't mention my name to the police, or I'll tell them about the bribe you paid to the zoning commissioner last year." "Jessica!" Richard screamed as she pushed through the revolving door and ran out into the night. He was alone. He turned back to Frank. "Frank, please, my passport is in my desk. Just let me get my passport." Frank shook his head. "Go home, Mr. Sterling, while you still have one." Richard stumbled out of the building. He walked aimlessly for blocks, the adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. He checked his phone. His battery was at 4%. He had one notification, a calendar reminder. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., Annual Investors Dinner. Grand Ballroom, the Plaza Hotel. He stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. The investors' dinner. That was his leverage. The investors didn't know yet. The Kensingtons were trying to keep this quiet, to lock him out before the dinner, so they could control the narrative. But if he showed up, if he got on that stage and spoke to them, he could spin this. He could claim it was a hostile takeover. He could claim the brothers were mentally unstable. He was Richard Sterling. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. He just needed a suit. and a way to get in. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and diamonds. It was the event of the season where the city's financial elite gathered to toast their own success. At 7:15 p.m., the room was buzzing, but they weren't talking about returns or interest rates. They were whispering. "Did you hear about the police at the Sterling building last night? I heard his credit cards were declined at Per Se. Where is Riley? I haven't seen her in months." In the backstage holding area, Arthur and Lucas stood adjusting their cuffs. They looked calm, like surgeons preparing for a routine operation. Riley stood between them. She was not wearing the red dress Richard had bought for Jessica. She was wearing a white tuxedo suit, sharp and tailored, her hair slicked back. She looked like a weapon. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked. "I'm ready," Riley said. Her voice didn't shake. "He's here, by the way," Lucas said, checking a monitor that showed the security feed of the service entrance. "He bribed a caterer with his cufflinks to get in through the kitchen." "Let him in," Riley said. "He needs to see this." Out in the ballroom, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Richard burst through the kitchen doors, straightening a tuxedo he had retrieved from the dry cleaners that morning by trading his gold fountain pen. He looked manic. His eyes were ruled, his hair slightly askew. He saw the microphone on the podium. He had to get there first. He rushed through the crowd, ignoring the gasps and the stares. He scrambled up the stairs to the stage just as the announcer began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice boomed. Richard grabbed the microphone. Feedback screeched through the room. "Please," Richard shouted, breathless. "Please, everyone, listen to me." The room went dead silent. "My name is Richard Sterling," he panted, gripping the podium. "And I am the victim of a conspiracy. The Kensington family is trying to steal this fund. They have locked me out of my office. They have frozen my accounts. They are trying to stage a coup because they are jealous of my success." He looked out at the crowd, searching for friendly faces. He saw the zoning commissioner. He saw his top investors. They were all staring at him with a mix of horror and embarrassment. "I made you all rich," Richard screamed, pointing a shaking finger. "You know me. I am the vision behind Sterling and Company. Without me, this company is nothing, nothing." "Actually," a voice rang out from the darkness behind him, "that's not entirely true." Richard whipped around. The heavy velvet curtains parted. Riley walked out, flanked by Arthur and Lucas. The gasp from the audience was audible. Riley looked radiant, powerful, and utterly unrecognizable from the timid woman Richard had sent away. "Riley," Richard whispered, You're supposed to be in Zurich. And you're supposed to be solvent," Riley said. Her voice amplified by the lapel mic she was wearing. It was crisp, clear, and commanding. She walked to the center of the stage. Richard tried to block her, but Lucas stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Richard's chest and effortlessly moving him aside. Riley stood at the podium. She didn't look at Richard. She looked at the investors. "Good evening," she said. "I apologize for the interruption. My husband is under a great deal of stress. It happens when you realize you've been spending money that isn't yours." "Lies!" Richard shouted, struggling against Lucas's grip. "She's crazy. I have doctors who will testify." "We have the ledgers, Richard," Arthur said, his voice carrying without a microphone. He held up a hard drive. "We have the forensic audit. We know about the shell companies in Panama. We know about the consulting fees. We know about the jewelry bought with client funds." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Theft was one thing. Stealing from them was another. Riley continued, her voice steady. "Effective immediately, the Kensington Trust is exercising its right to dissolve the partnership with Richard Sterling. The fund will be rebranded as Kensington Sterling, and I will be assuming the role of interim CEO. Richard laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. You CEO. You don't know how to run a fund. You plan charity galas. You're a housewife. Riley turned to him slowly. She looked him up and down, inspecting him like a bad investment. I have a master's in economics from Wharton. Richard, she said softly. I graduated top of my class. I handled the portfolio strategy for the first 3 years while you were busy networking. I stepped back because I wanted to support you. I made myself small so you could feel big. She took a step closer to him. But I'm done shrinking. She turned back to the crowd. The banks have been notified. The authorities are processing the evidence. And as for Mr. Sterling, she gestured to the side of the stage. 2 uniformed police officers walked out, accompanied by a man in a sharp grey suit, the district attorney. No, Richard whimpered. No, you can't do this. You did this, Riley said. You broke the contract. You broke the vows. You broke the trust. The officers stepped forward. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Richard Sterling, the officer said, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Richard looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Jessica, who was standing in the back of the room, hiding behind a waiter. She turned away when their eyes met. Riley, please, Richard begged, tears finally spilling over. I'm your husband. We can work this out. I'm sorry. I'll change. Riley watched as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. I know you'll change Richard, she said, from a suit to a jumpsuit. Get him out of here, Arthur ordered. As the police dragged Richard away, kicking and screaming about his rights, the ballroom erupted not in scandalized whispers, but in applause. They were applauding Riley. She watched him go, feeling a weight lift off her chest that she hadn't realized was there for 10 years. Arthur walked over and handed her a glass of champagne. To the new CEO, he said. Riley raised the glass. To the brothers who froze the bank. The job isn't done yet, Lucas said, checking his phone. We still have to deal with the Mistress. Riley's eyes hardened. Leave her to me. The morning sun that hit the 41st floor of the Sterling Tower didn't feel like the sun that used to shine on Richard Sterling's empire. It felt colder, sharper, more clinical. It was the light of a forensic audit. Riley stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now her corner office. The transformation had been swift and brutal, much like the coup itself. Richard's heavy, pretentious mahogany desk, a monstrosity he claimed was an antique from a French duke, but was actually a reproduction from a high-end catalogue, was gone. In its place stood a sleek, minimalist slab of tempered glass and brushed steel. The overstuffed leather chairs, which always smelled faintly of Richard's cigars and arrogance, had been replaced by ergonomic Herman Miller Aeron chairs. The room no longer looked like a gentleman's club where secrets were traded. It looked like a tactical command center. The silence in the outer bullpen was heavy. The police tape had been removed only hours ago, but the ghost of the raid still lingered. Junior analysts typed away at their Bloomberg terminals, with their heads down, terrified that making eye contact might result in a subpoena. They knew the new regime was watching. They knew Riley was watching. Riley turned away from the view of Central Park. She adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse. She felt a strange buzzing in her veins. Not caffeine, but the pure, uncut adrenaline of absolute control. The intercom on her desk buzzed. It was a sharp, digital sound that sliced through the quiet. Ms. Kensington, the voice of her new executive assistant, a sharp-witted woman named Priya, whom Richard had previously fired for being too opinionated, came through clear. She's here, Ms. Jessica Miller. She claims she has an appointment, though I don't see one on the calendar. Riley smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. She had been expecting this. In fact, she had counted on it. "Let her wait for 10 minutes, Priya," Riley instructed, her voice calm. "Then send her in." 10 minutes. Enough time for Jessica to sweat. Enough time for her to look around the lobby and realize that the security guards she used to flirt with were now looking at her like she was a security risk. When the double-glass doors finally slid open, Jessica Miller walked in. But the girl who entered was a shadow of the woman who had preened at the Met Gala. Gone was the red dress that screamed for attention. Gone was the perfectly blown-out bob and the diamond studs. Jessica was wearing a pair of faded designer jeans and a frantic, oversized hoodie. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and panicked phone calls. She clutched a cheap handbag to her chest like a shield. She stopped in the center of the room, looking disoriented by the new furniture. She looked at Riley and for a moment tried to summon her old bravado. "I'm here for my things," Jessica said, though her voice wavered, lacking its usual syrupy coating. "I have personal items in my desk, my laptop, my jewelry, and I want my final paycheck. You can't just withhold my salary." Riley didn't immediately answer. She walked slowly around her glass desk, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. Click, click, click. She picked up her iPad, scrolling through a document with agonizing slowness. "Your desk has been cleared, Jessica," Riley said finally, not looking up. "Building security packed a box for you. It contains a framed photo of your dog and a tube of lipstick. Everything else, the laptop, the iPad, the company phone, those are property of the firm. And since the firm is currently a crime scene, they are evidence." "Evidence?" Jessica's voice spiked an octave higher. "I didn't do anything. I was just an assistant. Richard made me do everything. You know how he is, Riley. He's controlling. I'm a victim here, too." Riley stopped scrolling. She placed the iPad down on the glass with a deliberate clack. She looked up, locking eyes with the younger woman. "A victim." Riley repeated the word as if tasting something sour. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. Jessica instinctively took a step back, hitting the edge of a chair. "You moved into my life, Jessica," Riley said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You didn't just take a job. You auditioned for my existence. You wore my clothes. You started buying my perfume. Santol 33, wasn't it? You encouraged my husband to commit me to a psychiatric ward in Zurich so you could play Lady of the Manor at the investors' dinner. That isn't victimization, Jessica. That is a hostile takeover attempt of a human life." I was just doing what I was told," Jessica stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "I was scared of him." "Were you scared when you were picking out the drapes for the penthouse renovation?" Riley asked, tilting her head. "Were you scared when you were ordering that custom Cartier bracelet on the company card? Or were you just greedy?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica whispered, looking toward the door. "No. Then let me refresh your memory." Riley walked back to her desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. It wasn't digital. It was a physical printout, flagged with a red evidence tab. "This," Riley said, holding the paper up to the light, "is a wire transfer authorization, dated 3 days ago. It authorizes the movement of $2 million from the Sterling Client Trust to a shell entity in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Consulting." Jessica went pale, her eyes fixed on the paper. "Richard signed it," Jessica said quickly. "It's his signature." "Yes, it is," Riley agreed. Richard signed as the principal, but you see, for a transfer of this magnitude, the bank requires a secondary countersignature from a designated compliance officer or a registered financial controller. Richard didn't want to ask the actual CFO because he knew it was illegal. So he made a new appointment. Riley stepped closer, thrusting the paper toward Jessica's face. Look at the countersignature, Jessica. Look at the bottom line. Jessica stared. There, in her own looping, girlish handwriting, was her name. Jessica Miller, acting comptroller. He told me it was a formality. Jessica cried, her composure shattering completely. He said he just needed a witness. He said it was for tax purposes. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, especially when you accept a title like acting comptroller. Riley said, her voice hard as steel. Legally, you didn't just witness a crime. You authorized it. You facilitated the embezzlement of client funds. You aren't the mistress anymore, Jessica. You're the accomplice. Jessica fell to her knees. The sound was heavy, a dull thud against the expensive floor. She put her hands over her face, sobbing loudly, her shoulders shaking. Please, she begged, her voice muffled by her hands. I didn't know. I'm 24. I don't want to go to jail. Please, Riley. You have to help me. I'll testify against him. I'll tell them everything. Riley looked down at the weeping woman. A year ago, Riley might have felt pity. She might have seen a young, foolish girl manipulated by a powerful man. But then she remembered the drive to the airport. She remembered the fear of being locked away in a clinic. She remembered the way Jessica had looked at her in the study, like Riley was trash to be taken out. I am helping you, Riley said coldly. I'm teaching you a lesson about due diligence. Riley pressed a button on the underside of her desk. The office doors opened immediately. 2 large, uniformed security guards stepped in. They weren't the friendly lobby greeters. These were the private contractors Arthur had hired. Ms. Miller is leaving, Riley announced, her voice devoid of emotion. Please ensure she exits the building. Jessica looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You're letting me go. I'm letting you go as far as the lobby, Riley corrected. I've already informed the NYPD detectives stationed downstairs that the signatory for the Cayman transfer has arrived to collect her belongings. They are very eager to speak with you. The color drained from Jessica's face entirely. No, Riley, you can't. The guards moved forward, hoisting Jessica up by her arms. She kicked and screamed, her heels scraping against the marble. Richard will kill me, she shrieked. I'm sorry. Save it for the jury, Riley said, turning her back on the scene. She listened as the screams faded down the hallway, cut off by the closing of the heavy elevator doors. Only then did she let out a breath. A moment later, the side door to the office opened. Arthur walked in. He looked tired but satisfied, holding 2 paper cups of bodega coffee, a stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them. That was cold, Arthur said, handing her a cup. Even for us. It was necessary, Riley replied, taking the coffee. The warmth seeped into her cold hands. She wanted to play in the big leagues, Arthur. She wanted the lifestyle, the risk, the thrill. Now she knows the rules. When the market crashes, the speculators get wiped out. Arthur walked to the window and leaned against the glass, looking out at the city. Lucas just called from the detention center. Richard is trying to cut a deal. Of course he is, Riley scoffed. Let me guess. He's offering to give up the location of the rest of the money if we drop the civil suit. Exactly. Arthur nodded. He's desperate. He's been in holding for 12 hours, and he's already crying about the thread count of the blankets. He says he has another 5 million stashed in a crypto wallet that the feds haven't found yet. No deals, Riley said instantly. Her eyes narrowed. We don't need him. Lucas is already tracking the blockchain hash. We'll find the money ourselves. Let Richard rot. He can trade his stock tips for cigarettes and protection. Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. You know, Grandfather always said you were the toughest one of us. He said you had a spine of steel, you were just too polite to show it. We forgot that for a while. I forgot it too, Riley admitted. She reached up and touched the pearl necklace at her throat. It was the one piece of jewelry Richard hadn't bought her. It had belonged to her mother. It was the only thing in the room that felt real. But I remember now. 3 months later. The rebranding was complete. The gold lettering on the building now read Kensington Capital. It had become the most successful distressed asset fund on Wall Street, known for its ruthless efficiency and ironclad ethics. Riley sat in her office, a copy of Forbes magazine on her desk. She was on the cover. She was wearing the white suit from the investors' dinner. Her arms crossed, her gaze piercing the camera lens. The headline read, The Iron Lady of Wall Street. How Riley Kensington took back the bank. She picked up a pen to sign the quarterly report. She was free. She was wealthy beyond what Richard had ever dreamed of. But most importantly, she was alone. Not out of loneliness and not out of sorrow. She was alone by choice. She had learned the most expensive lesson of her life. She had learned that the most dangerous thing a woman could do wasn't to love or to trust or to give. The most dangerous thing was to hand over the keys to her own kingdom and let someone else sit on the throne. Riley looked at the empty chair across from her desk, the chair where investors, rivals, and suitors would sit and try to negotiate with her. She smiled. She would never, ever hand over the keys again. What a roller coaster Riley went, from being erased to running the Emma, proving that you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. Richard and Jessica learned the hard way that when you play dirty with old money, you don't just get broke, you get frozen out. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, do you think Riley was too hard on Jessica, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Thanks for watching.